Can you tell me what is the problem with this photograph? If not, don't worry. In today's episode of Anyone Can Click, we're going to learn how to read tones and contrast like a pro so we can identify the problem and know what to do about it. Don't believe me? There is a quiz waiting for you right at the end so you can see it for yourself. Now, the best way to understand today's topic is to think of photography like cooking. The first step is you get your raw material, and the second step, you actually cook it. You add in your spices, you add in your seasoning to bring the dish to its final flavor. Now here you have two options. You can decide to do the cooking all by yourself, or you can delegate it to the camera. In the first case, you shoot in a mode called RAW, and in the second case, you shoot in the JPEG format. Either ways, the most important thing is you need to know your ingredients, you need to know what they do. And that's exactly what we're going to learn in today's episode. So we've divided the ingredients into two categories, light and color. And in today's episode, we're going to learn about light. So when you process light or exposure, you get a very important characteristic of your photograph called tones. Tones are basically how bright or dark different parts of your image are. Broadly, there are 5 kinds of tones that we need to know about. The first one is highlights. Highlights are the brighter parts of your photograph. The second is midtones. Midtones are areas of average brightness. Most of your scene sits here. And the third one is shadows. These are the darker parts of your photograph. Now, all these 3 tones differ in the degree of brightness, but they have one common feature. They all have some details or textures within them. They can either be visible or recoverable. And by recoverable, I mean details that are lost at first glance, but they can be revealed through the process of editing, especially if the photograph was taken in the raw format. Now there are 2 tones left. These are pure blacks and pure whites. Basically, these are parts of the photograph which have no texture, which have no features. Now you can manipulate these tones to create the mood and atmosphere to suit your storytelling narrative. For instance, if you want to create a photograph which is dramatic, which is moody, then you can allow the blacks and the shadows to dominate in your photograph. Such photographs are called low-key images. On the other hand, if you let the highlights and the whites dominate in your photograph, then the result is going to be an image which is very cheerful, which is very airy. And these images are called high-key images. Do you have a style that you naturally gravitate to between low-key and high-key? If you do, let me know in the comments below. There is one other way to use tones to your advantage for impactful storytelling. And this is by use of contrast. Contrast is the distance between the brighter and the darker parts of your photograph. So let's say that that gap is very big, which means that your darks are very dark, your brights are very bright, then the result is going to be a bold and punchy image. In other words, a high contrast image. On the other hand, if your tones are largely towards the center, then the resultant image is going to have a very soft, almost ethereal feel. And such images are called low contrast images. Now, both of these techniques of tonal dominance and contrast can be used either in isolation or in combination with each other to tell the story that you want. For instance, let's take a look at one of the previous photographs. As we saw, this is a low-key image, but it is also a high contrast image. Now that we've learned about tones, comes a very important question. Why do they matter? We already saw that they play a very important role in storytelling. But there is one other reason. It's because our cameras are not perfect. Our eyes do a phenomenal job at reproducing the scene in front of us. They're constantly adjusting and stitching the brighter and darker parts of the scene so we can experience the world like we do. But our cameras can only hold a certain amount of brightness in one shot. What this means is that just because you're able to see details in the scene in front of you does not mean that it's going to show up in your photograph. And this limit, or rather limitation, is called dynamic range. So think of dynamic range as a slider that represents the range of tones your camera can capture, from the deepest shadows to the brightest highlights. Everything that lands in that slider will have details and textures. But everything else which falls outside the slider is going to show up on your photograph as featureless black or featureless white. This feature is called clipping. And in those clipped areas, your camera is not going to see details even if it exists in the real scene. Knowing tones helps you identify these darker and brighter parts of your photograph so you can take an informed decision. You can choose to protect that which really matters and let the less important parts fall away if they must. Determining what details you actually want and what details you're okay with letting go as a part of your creative process, that's your decision. Now let's revisit this image. And once again, I ask, what is the problem with this photograph?
The main problem is blown highlights in the sky. A big chunk of the frame is at almost pure white, so there's no texture in the clouds. And by either decreasing my exposure or by recovering the details in post, I can restore this image to the way it was intended to look.
So therefore, tones are very important in post-processing to tell the story, but they are also important to manage your settings to ensure that you're not losing out on important details while clicking your shot. Because if you do, then no amount of, let's say, honest post-processing can bring it back. But to be able to do that, you need to know what, where, and how to look. And for that, there is an important tool that we're going to cover in the next episode called the histogram. With that, we have reached the end of today's episode of Anyone Can Click. If you've enjoyed it, do not forget to like, subscribe, comment. It greatly helps the channel. As promised, here's the quiz. I will see you next week. Until then, take care. Bye.